I had the opportunity to go. My name, Keith St. Clair. I teach in the social science department, political science, international relations. But I had the opportunity to go to Oman this last May, 2009, or wasn't? I guess it was the last week in April, with the World Affairs Council of America, of which we have a local chapter, the World Affairs Council of West Michigan, based at Aquinas, and they offer that great series every fall and March, the Great Decision Lecture Series every Monday in February and March. And so I found out about it through them, and I applied, and I was one of 8 chosen. And I was one of the few faculty members that got to go. There were some other business leaders, but representatives from various World Affairs Council chapters across the United States. And so I was very fortunate to get to go on this trip. And the most of the money was that paid for it was by the Sultanate of Oman itself. So the government of Oman, which is really the private fortune of the Sultan, paid for my expenses. And so it was a great opportunity. And I was pleased to have GRCC assist me and support me in that endeavor. And we were gone for about a week. And it's called the Leadership Mission, but basically it's a chance to a cultural exchange between people, a chance to learn about the countries that we're going to and to share our knowledge of our region with them, and certainly enabled me to do that. Oman is on the Arab Peninsula. It's an Arab country. This is the map of the region, and so Oman is down here on the Arabian Peninsula, and most of it being made up of Saudi Arabia. And the ones in dark green here are part of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is kind of a regional NAFTA or attempt to be like the European Union, but it hasn't gone near as extensive as far as its integration. There's talk of creating a common currency, but Oman has opted out of that common currency. So you have, between them, you have the United Arab Emirates right here. You have Qatar here, and you have Bahrain, the island here, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Oman. And they have some things in common, but there's some significant differences that I was able to find out. Throughout history, the British during the early 20th century were dominant in this region. But if you go back to before the 16th century, the Portuguese came in and dominated this area and built a bunch of fortifications along their trade routes here that the Omanis themselves were able to kick out in the 17th century, only to see themselves invaded by the Persians up here in Iran. And then they proceeded to kick them out later that same century. And the leader of the group that did that is the dynasty that still rules Oman to this day. And they proceeded to liberate the coastline from the Portuguese forts and the Persians, but the Portuguese had also settled down the coast of Africa, and the Omanis were quick to pick up those trade routes. And even as far south in Africa as the island of Zanzibar, off of Tanzania, became a part of their empire. And it was only divided in the 19th century, but the same ruling family ruled in Zanzibar as ruled in Oman up until the mid-20th century. And the dynasty so the dynasty is lost in Zanzibar, which is now part of Tanzania, but the dynasty still continues in Oman. And so in that sense, it has a lot in common with its neighboring states, a kingdom, as it were. This is the flag of Oman, and like many of the other Arab countries of the region, it shares the colors, the green, the yellow, although the black is not present here, which is interesting. Usually there's usually a black, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and the Fatimid colors, and then the red of the Arab uprising against the Turks in the early 20th century. This is the symbol that's on the flag. This is a Khanjir knife. And it is the symbol of the country, the symbol of the Sultan, and they wear their Khanjirs quite proudly on formal occasions. And the prized ones are made of silver, mined from Oman. And here's an example of one. And of course, you could buy these in local tourist shops and stuff. But Yeah, they wear these on formal occasions, or they wear them to impress. This is the other thing that Oman is known for. This is an incense burner, but the incense that comes from Oman that's quite famous is frankincense. All the way back to biblical times, Oman was prized for the rare frankincense tree that grows in this region, whose sap is bled and then dried and then burned to create the fragrance that was longed for back in biblical times. And so they still trade it to this day. And if you go into the markets of Oman, you smell it all over the place. They're selling frankincense all over the place. They still definitely prize their trade in it. And of course, they're also known for their dates. And here you have a picture of that, which I think most of us have had. Fishing is an industry that's important to Oman. It's becoming more important as oil becomes less important, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But they're really trying to rely more on their fishing industry than they have been in the past. And the fish markets that we got to go to along the coast, right here with quite large catches. This is a traditional Omani ship. It is I think referred to as a dhow. It is, this one was built by Tim Severin, who was a British adventurer. And he built it according to the time period that the legendary Sinbad ruled. Now, I have to defer to the historians in here if Sinbad really existed. I do not know if Sinbad was a real person. Was Sinbad a real person, Dorothy? Yeah, I think, well, anyway, the legend of Sinbad is well known. Yes, Dave?
He's a comedian from Ben Harbor.
Of course, that's Sinbad, yes. Well, this is the one that apparently the legend said that he sailed to China in a ship such as this. And so Tim Severin, who was a British adventurer, he built this ship in the 20th century and actually made the same journey by boat to show that it could be done and to draw attention to the legends of Sinbad. And this is the very ship. They've got it on display there and are quite proud of that. And they take pride in the fact that Sinbad supposedly came from Oman. This is a picture of some of the Portuguese forts that still exist along the shoreline, and this one is quite prominent there in the Bay of Matra and Muscat, which are kind of neighboring harbors that now serve as the capital of Oman. And this is the Bay of Muscat or Matra. This is the harbor, and it's prized harbor, and you can kind of see that. Oman does not have, and this is a major city, Oman does not have the major skylines that many of the other Gulf states are rapidly building, and these fantastic tall buildings and beautiful architecture. And Oman's skyline is still relatively modest, even though it does benefit significantly from oil revenues. And this is a traditional ship in the harbor, I suppose, for tourists. This is inland. Much of the center of Oman is desert, but they do irrigate for crops, and they do grow crops. This is in Nizwa, which at one time in the heartland of Oman was really the capital at one time, before they were able to take the coastline from the Portuguese. And you can still see that the flag still flies over it. They've certainly spruced it up. It would have been in disrepair, but they've made it look frankly new. So these are just kind of representative of the time period back in the 16th, 15th century. This is looking from that tower out onto the Nizwa oasis. And so it is the water that both makes this area green in the midst of this desert, and of course the people that want to live there. And they're quite proud of their long history of canal irrigation under the ground. Water, surprisingly, in this arid country to this day, or today, is surprisingly cheap, which I just really couldn't believe. I have to believe that there's a huge government subsidy to keep it as cheap as it is. Even though I know, and I was told while I was there, that Oman has certainly expanded its desalination plants to draw water from the salty ocean and get rid of the salt. But that's an expensive process. That is not a cheap way to get water, even though you can see why they would resort to that. And yet, it was 1 real, which was their currency, to $2.60. So their currency was more valuable than the dollar. But for 1 real, or in other words, $2.60, we could get 17 liters of water at the grocery store, and that just seems surprisingly cheap to me. And nobody could give me an adequate answer. I just have to believe that it's just heavily subsidized by the government. I actually got in trouble for taking this picture. Apparently no photos allowed in the store. I'm not sure if that was for security or just the modesty for the sake of the women. This is one of our group, actually. He's a native Sri Lankan, and Mark Fernando is his name. And but his people are from Sri Lanka. I should say he's absolutely American. He's born and raised in the United States, but his family's from Sri Lanka. And so he had some interesting experiences in Oman. I know one night we were going into a nightclub, and I got in first, and there was no charge or anything, but when he tried to get in, he had to pay. Or he didn't pay, but he was expected to pay. And he tends to believe that the Omanis were trying to keep local immigrant workers out of the touristy areas. That was his explanation for it. This is a more traditional Oman Bedouin style home along the coastline. And this would have been what that looked like in the interior. And traditionally, they would have eaten their meals on the floor. And we did go to a traditional Omani restaurant and experience that. And it looked much like this. But most Omanis don't necessarily live like this, which I'll get to in a bit. This is the Sultan of Oman himself, the Sultan Qaboos bin Said. And like I said, his dynasty goes back to the 17th century or 18th century. There he is with his khanjar, and he is the ruler of Oman. Oman has not really adopted much democratic procedurals, even at the local level. They do have an elected council, but it's merely advisory. But they have developed a reputable government with some corruption, but comparatively less than much of the neighboring states. So it has a good reputation there. Many credit the Sultan himself for living up to British principles and the idea of delegating authority rather than to rule directly. Is that what you're going to say, Roland?
Professor, the enduring quality of the legacy is probably part of the reason why there's a stability there. Along, possibly, you might suggest, as you pointed out, the British influence. As I understand, the court system duplicates the British court system.
Yeah, they really adopted a lot of British institutional culture in that way.
And the fact that it's a long enduring legacy.
Yeah.
That's why
It makes me wonder, though, whether it will survive him once he passes on, because a lot of them credit the fact that he's responsible for that. He took power in 1970 through a coup against his father. His father was much less progressive, much less forward-thinking, and the country was really backward at that time. And there were insurrections occurring. In the Dhofar region of southern Oman, along the Omani border, there was an uprising that was linked to the Marxist support, and certainly the British assisted Oman in putting that down. But in 1970, during that very conflict, his son seized power through force and deposed him. And for most Omanis, consider that for the best, because he really has brought Oman into the 20th century at that time and is bringing it into the 21st century now. When he seized power in 1970, the capital of Oman, Muscat, was very primitive. It was basically its historical walled city was the extent of the city. The gates were locked at night. It had the only paved roads in the whole country. And that is, and as hopefully through some of the photos that I'll be able to show you, you can see how modern it has become in many ways. And nowadays, and that was 1970, and nowadays, Oman is far, even the poorest regions of Oman are far ahead of the poorer regions of Saudi Arabia as far as their development. Not that they don't have further to go, but nevertheless. And here's another part of the port of Matruh, and you can see this is the market area. And you can see kind of the terrain in the background and how rocky and kind of mountainous it is along the coast. But the coastline is absolutely beautiful. Crystal blue waters and fabulous fishing and, of course, enormous sun. Triple digits in the summertime. It's incredibly hot there. And, of course, the humidity helped make you feel that even more. So anyway, but they are attracting tourism, and they're really trying to boost that industry. Not the cheap European backpacker stuff, but the more high-end, expensive tourism is what they're after. Okay, so here Oman now is a part of the Gulf Cooperation Council of these other states. They've kind of pooled their area resources in trade links, but they're not adopting the common currency that the other ones are pledged to. These are some of the statistics I've got on the various members of the Gulf Cooperation Council. So you can kind of compare their populations. And so Saudi Arabia, by far the largest, with 23 million people. This is 2002 figures, 23 million people, and Oman only has 2.5 million. It's more comparable to the size of Kuwait population-wise. Bahrain, quite small. Qatar's quite small, and then UAE is more comparable. The population growth rate, you can see that throughout the region, population is exploding, mostly in the United Arab Emirates, but Oman, very fast-growing country at close to 4%. This is the population under 15, and you can see where that population boom, almost half the population is under 15 years of age. And so that's going to create enormous strains on the state of Oman, even more so than the neighboring states. The percent of non-citizens living there in Oman, 26% of the people in Oman are not citizens of the country. And so the whole region is drawing on an enormous influx of foreign workers to come in and do most of the menial tasks that most natives don't want to do. And you can see that it's just incredible in Qatar, where 80%, and in the United Arab Emirates, 82% of the population are not native citizens, but foreigners from everywhere from Indonesia, India, Pakistan, throughout the Middle East and Asia, and even parts of Africa. And then the last statistic was basically showing you what percent of the labor force is foreign immigrants, 55% in Oman. This is the income from energy exports, and a lot of that is oil. Oman, still respectable, but not near what you see elsewhere in the region. Abu Dhabi, which is a part of the United Arab Emirates, takes the cake. Qatar here. This is annual average in thousands of dollars. Kuwait, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Oman. And perhaps more importantly is here in the white boxes you see the estimated duration of their remaining resources. And you can see what the Omanis are concerned about. They're expected to run out of oil and energy in 17 years as far as their production levels, assuming those production levels continue at this course. Whereas Saudi Arabia is much more secure, 100 years left, 400 years for Qatar. Dubai is a part of the United Arab Emirates. But Bahrain and Oman are down near the bottom. And so you see with Oman is they're desperate they see the writing on the wall, that they've got to replace the oil dependency on oil, which currently makes up about half of their GDP and about 70% of their government revenues. They need to replace it with something. And so that's why there's a dramatic push into fishing, tourism, because they've got sun, they've got beach. They're also looking, because of the sun, they're also looking at alternative energy resources. They're really looking for solar. And so they're really pouring a lot of investment dollars into that, surprisingly enough, considering that they rely currently so much on oil.
The size of the country, do you have any idea as to what prospects are for in-ground type of resources?
Oh, minerals. Yeah, there's a lot of mining that goes on in Oman. Yeah, I mentioned the silver mines historically, and they still have that, and iron ore production, and yeah, so they have mineral wealth.
The Gulf states are so small, the other Gulf states,
Yeah, so they have the land that we would think that would give them much more mining resources, which I think is true. This is the palace of the Sultan himself in the Bay of Muscat. And so, you could see that he was trying to impress on many occasions where we didn't get to meet the Sultan, by the way, lest any of you think I was that lucky. We were guests of the Sultan, but we didn't get to meet the Sultan. But we did meet members of his family, many of them being government ministers. And we were certainly wined and dined, and and they dressed to impress. I mean, they wanted to make an impression, and they most certainly did with us.
You mean also the women folk?
There were women ministers that we met with, absolutely, yeah. Women, perhaps Oman is considered to be a little bit more progressive than you might have thought in that regard. Education levels seem quite good for women making up 50% of the student body at the elementary and secondary level. They claim that they graduate 95% of their students from high school. Only about 15% of their students go on to college, but they claim that it's a pretty much equal mix between women and men as there as well. Women did not have to wear the burqa from head to toe covering, although some chose to do that. And I think, in the more, in the capital, there was maybe less of that than you would have found in the interior and some of the more rural areas. But it's certainly a very conservative country, no doubt. Alcohol, though surprisingly, is available. Omanis don't have easy access to it, but they know where to go. That they can go to certain bars and drink it. But it's mostly the foreigners that the alcohol is for. But of the Gulf countries, Qatar, and Oman are the two that allow alcohol sales. But in other respects, it's a very religious society, a very conservative society in many respects. This is one of the ministers that happened to be a relative of the Sultan, and he hosted us in his, it was not his house, but it was his summer quarters or whatever, and very impressive, a fountain in the basement, and he's wearing a traditional Omani dress, the dishdash that they call it, and most of them are white, but this one happens to be maroon, and you can see the tassel here. This tassel would be dipped in perfume, and so he smells good, and he can smell that anytime that he wants by lifting up his little tassel. He was very generous and very welcoming. We were quite impressed with him as the host, and then. Before we left, they brought out this burning oud, which they enjoy the fragrance, and they put it before you, and you waft it in front of your nose, and you inhale, and it's supposed to be a very pleasing scent. It's a wood that comes from India, actually, so they import it, but it's traditional Omani fare, and so it's not intoxicating in any way. It's just a fragrant smell. And then we washed our hands in rose water. They brought that out. We got to do that. And this is, this woman is in education, but she is also a member of the royal family. It's a quite extensive royal family. What's interesting, though, is that the Sultan himself, although married, and has been married twice, he divorced his second wife, but he's still married to his first. They can have up to 4 wives. It wasn't talked about openly, but we could not help but hear the rumors that he was in fact gay. And in going to the U.S. Embassy and talking to the U.S. Charge d'Affaires there, that he did confirm that the Sultan is well known to be a homosexual. Surprising in a very conservative country. And nobody really acknowledges that, but everybody knows it, or most people know it. And so, but they just look the other way, because he is not obvious about it. He is playing the game. He has taken a wife, and although they don't have any children, he has taken a wife. And so, as long as the facade is there, Oman is surprisingly tolerant of that. It would not be allowed to not do the facade. So marriage is expected. And as long as he surrounds himself with those trappings and continues in the pageantry of that, of a heterosexual life, and most of Omani, I was quite surprised by that. Very tolerant there. This is the mosque that the Sultan built. He's quite proud of it. I think it just opened in 2000. Is one of the most amazing mosques. It's a very modern architecture, but still it dressed to impress. I mean, it's just the marble, the glass, everything about it was very impressive inside. And which brings me to another point, and that is I discovered, I had heard of Sunni Muslims, I had heard of Shiite Muslims, but I had never heard of the Abadi Muslims, which is what most Omanis are. It's kind of a third category of Islam that kind of, for the most part, died out in most areas, but they're related to the ancient Kharijites that killed Ali in the dispute between the Shia and the Sunnis and their leader. And the Kharijites, they didn't believe in either. And so the Abadis are the holdovers from that. And they can also be found in parts of Tunisia and Libya. And so their faction killed Ali, who had persecuted them. And then when Ali died, was it Muawiyah of the Umayyad dynasty, what became the leader of the Sunnis, he continued to persecute the Abadis, what became the Abadis as well. And so they remained a small faction of Islam, but they still exist, and they're still relatively conservative, but most prominently in Oman. There's also a lot of Shiites in Oman, being right across the ocean or the Persian Gulf from Iran, where they're, of course, the largest Shiite country. So it was interesting that I was able to be turned on to a new segment of Islam that I hadn't really heard much about. And so I found that intriguing. And to some extent, they might be one of the reasons why Wahhabi Sunnism, which is very popular in Saudi Arabia, it's a very fundamentalist form of Sunni Islam. The Wahhabis, who are also very missionary, have tried to come into Oman, and the Abadis have pretty much kept them out. And they keep a very tight border with not only Saudi Arabia, but also with Yemen. And the Omani security forces are very respected, very capable police force, very capable military, albeit small. They have created military bases for the American use when we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq in 2003. Although they were not supportive of that, they did host the bases in which the American forces came from. There are no current American forces there now, however, and the Omani government has been very critical of the Bush administration in both its treatment in Iraq as well as its support of Israel against the Palestinians. And that's a conflict that the Omanis continually brought up that needs to be brought to a resolution, a peaceful resolution, because they're very concerned about the destabilization and the violence that encourages throughout the region. They are not as threatened by Iran itself, surprisingly. They enjoy a good trade with Iran, even though Iran has trade rules on the Persian Gulf. The Omani government is actually encouraging the smuggling that goes on and smuggling goods across the Persian Gulf to Iran. And the Iranians are pretty much turning a blind eye to it because in many ways, some Iranians, including some of the Republican Guards, they make money on that. So they are not as threatened by Iran. They don't want to see any revolutions in the area. The last thing they want to see is the Sultan overthrown. But the younger generation is becoming a little bit more critical and less thankful as the older generation for what the Sultan has been able to provide. And one wonders if that bodes for change in the near future once this Sultan passes. He's been an incredibly stabilizing force, Oman, and if he's getting quite old, I forget his exact age, but once he does die, not have any direct children, it'll go to the extended family, and they're right now, they said, trying to discuss the secession, so that's less of a concern. This is inside the mosque. You can see the marble and the Persian carpetings. Here's some of the women of Oman, typical dress. Not all of them covered their faces, although I did see a little of that. They were all very modestly dressed anyway. Certainly had their hair covered. And here, I got a kick out of this, a little Barbie-like doll that was in the equivalent of their Myers. It wasn't Myers, but yeah, they call it Fula, and she's dressed for evening prayer, And I was almost tempted to bring that back for my niece, but somebody bought it. I just took a picture of it. Yeah, but still kind of looks like Barbie underneath that headdress. And so, some of the typical dress of some of the men and what they wear. And this is one of the resorts, of course. It is known as a tourist destination, especially by Europeans. Americans, I think, are a little reluctant to travel to the region, but Europeans are not as intimidated, and they have certainly discovered the advantages that Oman has to offer with regards to tourism. And it is more of the high-end tourism. It's not the cheap backpackers slunking across, and that's because it's those dollars that the Omanis are trying to encourage, and they're trying to promote themselves as upscale tourist destination. And it was certainly there on view before me, and a lot of sunbathers out here. And we didn't get a chance to go up and down the coast in a ship. I would have loved to have done that, but I've heard that it's just absolutely gorgeous. And this is significantly at a distance. I know on the global map it looks fairly close to Somalia where the pirates are, but this portion of Oman is significantly away from that. And here's what apparently some of the patrons of this hotel had, a Lamborghini, which I had not seen. I had to take a picture of that. So, I mean, they were definitely getting some high-end clients staying there, whether they were domestic or foreign.
Professor St.
Yes?
I appreciate the exposure. My class is a multicultural class. We're dealing with Egypt, as you recall. I already shared that with you. So I wanted them to get a sense of some of the Arab influences, especially what you shared with us. And I'm wondering if you might give them an opportunity for questions or something like that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I would definitely.
And I'm sure they enjoy knowing that.
Is there any questions? I can open it up to questions right now if you have any. Yes, please.
Actually, two. I was curious about the level of English among the upper classes and then also general population, how much English teaching is going on and what style of teaching is it?
That's an excellent question. I'll repeat your questions for the microphone, if you don't mind. But what was the level of English speaking that I encountered while I was there in Oman? And I must say, I think the average person probably doesn't know English, may know some of it, because certainly in a lot of the markets, if you want to sell anything, some of the few English phrases or English words were quite common. But I don't know if I would have felt comfortable going around the country on my own without a language guide of some sort. But that said, at the college level, almost all of the college courses are taught exclusively in English. So the college educating, absolutely, absolutely, which is only about 15% of the population. And that's why they were really encouraging foreign students to come there, European students, because knowing that the classes are taught in English, they feel that that might attract multinationals to come to Oman and attend some of their universities. I inquired about the political science programs, and surprise, surprise, there is no political science programs in Oman. So I don't know if what that says. I guess maybe they're threatened by that. I don't know. But for the most part, I was surprised by the tolerance that I witnessed. I knew incredibly little about this area of the world before I actually got there. And I was surprised to see that in Oman that you can find Christian churches. You can find Jewish synagogues in Oman. Now, granted, the people who attend those synagogues and attend those churches are primarily the immigrant workers who are coming. But nevertheless, the Omanis are very tolerant about it.
You couldn't have that in Saudi Arabia, for example.
No, they don't allow that in Saudi Arabia. That's an excellent point. But they do allow it, not in Oman, but I believe also elsewhere in the other Gulf countries.
And I lived in Kuwait. All those churches exist there.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I was surprised to see was that in Bahrain now has a female Jewish ambassador to the United States. Because there is a small Jewish community in Bahrain, and their Secretary of State, so to speak, is a female Jew, representing Bahrain to the United States, even though they don't recognize the State of Israel. Yeah, which is interesting. So, you know, we forget that there's a history of more toleration, a history of multi-religious communities in this area of the world, and it's been unfortunate in the 20th century especially that we've seen a huge segregation of and depopulation of non-Muslim faiths in that area of the world. But Oman is still pretty tolerant of that. Now, granted, almost all Omanis are Muslim, and the vast majority of them are either Abadi or Sunni, but there is a significant Shiite minority there in Oman as well. So perhaps that partly explains why maybe they're a little bit more tolerant, because they're more exposed to it. I don't know. You don't find that same toleration in Saudi Arabia, even though I'm told that in Saudi Arabia the government will turn a kind of a blind eye to the immigrant communities who come there to work and what they practice. Still, you know, still pretty strict. Yes?
How are women treated? I know, like, it's becoming more modern, but in a lot of, like, you know, the Middle Eastern countries, not treated like they are here, obviously, so.
Yeah, I think it's not the Saudi Arabia that you see on the news. I mean, in Saudi Arabia, women have to be covered from head to toe when they go out in public. That is not a requirement in Oman. You saw the way they dress there. I mean, they have to cover their hair and be modest in that way, but other than that, it's pretty typical of the region. And so cultural norms, so to speak. Women going to university, 50% of the student population, women. I think that's pretty progressive. When we went to the U.S. Embassy, the U.S. diplomat that we talked to said that the Sultan had pushed through great legislation recently. Pushed through, he just dictated it, and they voted on it. But anyway, he had created legislation that was supposed, at least in name, provide all the equality under the law for women and men. That said, men can have 4 wives, and the reverse is not true. So to me, that's not exactly equal, but nevertheless, his point, I think, was that you find greater equality here than maybe elsewhere in the Gulf. It's not perfect. I need to remind, of course, my students of this, even in the United States, but you don't have to go back that far in the U.S. to find women treated incredibly poorly, if not worse than in the Middle East. I mean, it hasn't been that long women have indeed come a long way in a short period of time. 200 years ago in this country, women were considered property basically under the law. Women could not own property in their own name. Women could not sue for divorce in the United States. Only a man could sue for divorce. If you did divorce, the woman was put out on the street. She got nothing. The kids stayed with the man. Marital rape was, there was no such thing. A woman could not deny her husband sexual privileges anytime he demanded it under the law. There was no such thing under the law as marital rape in the United States. And of course, all of that has changed in just less than 200 years. It's no wonder that women in this country were some of the early abolitionists of slavery, because very much for all practical purposes, women were the equivalent of property. So they are not, the United States was worse in its treatment of women 200 years ago than what's going on in the Middle East today. And in fact, same time period, at that time, the Middle East probably more progressive in its treatment of women. So yeah, do they have further to come now? Have we passed them up progressively there? Yes, but I think they're coming along. Yeah. I'm optimistic in that respect. Less so about Saudi Arabia.
In our class, we deal, of course, with Egypt, and I've given the presentation of the aspect to which, even as we see the modernism that, for example, the upper classes experience, and our book is authored by a woman who has a Cambridge PhD, and she's in the United States. She's struggling to reconcile her Islamic background with the modernism she's trying to portray in the women's studies she has at Harvard Divinity School. At this point, even as we look at the absence of some misogyny in the example of modern Egypt, there's always the undercurrent by which the religious tradition tends to overshadow such behavior. Meaning they insist upon these things that you suggest about women's secondary role and being subservient and being at the whim and wishes of a man. Now, the question I'm trying to make is the question, how is the pattern evident in this particular society? Because I'm getting a very progressive impression.
Yeah, well, and part of that is the bias of our trip. I mean, we didn't exactly meet with the poorest individuals in the society, right? Most of the people I talked to were men, not women. Did I meet some government ministers who are women? Absolutely. Some of them were related to the Sultan, some were not, but it was just really a few. So, I mean, it's not, if you ask me, it's by far from an equal society, despite the Sultan's promulgating this new law, declaring equality. I still think it's really more in name only, but still more progressive than perhaps some of the other countries I've been to. I was impressed with Oman, and unfortunately, it was rather limited exposure. I was only there a week. I was only there predominantly in the capital. The only time we went out was when we went to Nizwa, which was in the more of the center of the country. Were they trying to oppress us? Absolutely. We were met mostly with government personnel. And that's the other thing I can tell you, is that most native Omanis hold out for a government job, because it's perceived as to be lighter duty, good benefits. There's much less of a civil society outside of the government, where people are they're not really self-starters as far as their own organizations, and there's much less entrepreneurialism than the government would like, and it's trying to encourage some of that. But a lot of the things when it comes to equality and progressive thinking, a lot of that is cultural. I don't know how much we should focus on the religion as being the fault for that. Certainly, we're a Muslim country. We have Muslims in the United States, and I work with Muslims. I have Muslim students, and I don't see any incompatibility with freedom and democracy and Islam and those examples. Parts of Europe are Islamic, so I think it depends. I think a lot of the way women are treated is more so just the local custom than just because of some religious dictates. I don't think there's much in the Quran other than the fact that women should dress decently, but I don't think it goes into much more detail than that as far as what a decent dress is. And yet in Saudi Arabia, you see the extreme interpretation where women have to be dressed from head to toe. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm not sure if you will know much about this, only being there 1 week, but I had read about Oman's traditional industries being some of the things you talked about with the tassel and the smoke being in the incense and the fragrances and things like that. Did you see any evidence of that continuing?
Oh, yeah, they are smokers. They smoke the shisha, the hookah pipe.
The incense and the perfumes and things like that.
Oh yeah, in the markets, they're just full of that. Yeah, you go into the local bazaars. Yeah, absolutely. The weirdest thing I saw, and I've actually bought it, was placenta soap. I'd never heard of that, but apparently it has the ingredients of the placenta that makes you younger.
Placenta of what?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Absolutely, that was my question. Placenta of what? Good question. Don't have an answer for that one, and I couldn't see it on the box itself, but it was soap. Yeah.
You know, the smelling something, those markets are called Attarine, the Attar, is the most bizarre of parts of some of the places in Cairo, for example. You go to the Attarine and you're overwhelmed with all these scents. You probably were there when you were
Yeah, I've smelled the aromas of the bazaars of Cairo and Istanbul and Jerusalem and now Muscat, Oman. So yeah, I love the incense. Frankincense, you know, it smelled like a Catholic church to me. I was like, I got back and I asked the priest. I said, "Do you use the frankincense? Because that smelled so much like what I remember in some of the Catholic churches that I've been to." He says, well, they sometimes use that or something else. He was kind of vague in his answer. But yeah, I think it's a very pleasant smell. My wife can't stand that smell of incense burners, but I think it's very pleasing. I don't know if I necessarily want to burn it in my house, but they were burning it all over the place. Absolutely, absolutely. What are we doing on time? Well, time for a few more questions if anybody has any.
Come on, guys, you're marketing.
Well, I'll take phone calls. Phone-in questions are fine. Those playing at home. Yes.
What about the dialect of Arabic that's spoken there? Is there anything special?
Well, it is Arabic. I don't speak Arabic, but I did have a language guide that kind of gets me by wherever I happen to go. I don't pick up really much on the differences. Certainly there are. You go throughout the Arab world, all throughout North Africa. Moroccan Arabic is significantly different from Egyptian Arabic or even the Arabic of the Gulf countries. Now, the Omani Arabic would be very similar to the rest of the Arab Peninsula. I don't know if that's, you know, if they take pride in that. I assume they do, that they're the oldest maybe, but yeah, it's different. And I've heard that it may be as different, if not more so, than French to Spanish or French to Italian or something like the Romance languages. It can differ significantly, in other words, between regions. And what a thing to major in if you want to get a foreign language. Arabic is certainly going to be one that's going to be important in the United States. And so taking Arabic, I would encourage you to do it. I mean, I think it's a fascinating language. And very similar to Hebrew. They're both Semitic languages. I mean, when I was in Israel, they can understand a lot of what each other says. Yeah.
I am a student of Arabic. I took 3 years, and I'm doing an independent study at Western right now with Dr. Mustafa.
Oh, excellent.
I've gone beyond what they have to offer. I spent the summer in Morocco at an intensive school to study, and I hope So,
Well, that's great. I mean,
and-
so you've had
and
Arabic.
everyone will take Arabic, and you know that programs will
Mhm.
grow to the point where they will need more teachers.
So perhaps you're the one we should direct a question to. Have you been to, besides Morocco and speaking Arabic there, have you been to any of the other Arab countries
No,
to
I
compare
haven't.
it?
No, I haven't.
And that's then, but I think what I'm saying is accurate, and what you would find.
From everything that I know and everything that I've studied, but I'm really just a baby. I just started 4 years ago, and
It's a difficult language, I understand.
It's a very difficult language, but very fascinating. It just
Yeah.
it grabs a hold of you. You get obsessed with it.
Yeah. Yes.
What was the most interesting thing you had food-wise when you were there?
You know, I don't think anything really sticks out. It was pretty typical Middle Eastern fare. I mean,
Well, I don't know what Middle Eastern food really is. So.
well, then you should try it because we have it here in Grand Rapids. But wherever I go, of all the Arab countries, all the Arabs that I talk to tell me that the Lebanese have the best. They're known for the best Arabic food. And so when I was in Jordan, for example, you know, there was the falafels and the shish kebabs and the you know, what the Greeks call the gyros, and you know, that's, you know, that area of the Mediterranean is very similar. And you know, I don't remember anything really distinctive about the food. I mean, I enjoyed the food. I love Middle Eastern cuisine. I love most cuisine, with the exception of maybe Japanese. I'm not real keen on Japanese food. I will eat it, but it's not my favorite. But I never have to worry about that when I'm in the Middle East, and the same was in Oman. You know, when we sat in that restaurant, we all sat on the floor. You know, they bring out kind of the pita bread, and you use that, and you pick up the pieces of meat, and of course there was no pork because the Muslims wouldn't be eating that. So it was beef or lamb, and then usually some rice, and you know, various spices, saffron, whatever. But it was, I'm not a cook, so I wish I could go into more detail. But all I know is I enjoy it. It's got rice, meat, and bread, and I'm happy.
Speaking of food, like, and since it's like still kind of like a conservative Middle Eastern country, did you see like any like American places like McDonald's and stuff like that? Because I know McDonald's is like everywhere, so I was just wondering if there was any like American shops and stuff.
Yeah, I saw McDonald's. I saw one. It seems to me I saw one. But yeah, but I didn't get a chance to go eat there. So
So it's not really like Americanized, kind of like there isn't a lot of American influence in.
oh, I wouldn't say that. I mean, certainly the cars. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of American culture. I didn't hear a lot of American music while I was there, except maybe in the hotels. But I mean, you know, our culture is very influential around the world. But you know, that kind of aspect of Americana, I guess I didn't see. In McDonald's, I had what was it, a McArabia, I think, or something like that. I forget when the last time I went to McDonald's in the Middle East, but they, you know, they had some kind of local fare that they gave a name to, but it's still McDonald's.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what attracts me to it. I rarely eat at McDonald's in the United States, but you know, when all it does is take me outside the United States, throw me in a different culture, and all of a sudden I start having these cravings for American junk food. Because I guess when you can't have it, then that's when you miss it. And so I always try to eat at McDonald's when I travel, but I don't think I got that opportunity in Oman. Just to at least, if anything, just to compare the prices.
Yeah.
Yes, Audrey.
For the women that are just traveling and visiting, what do they dress like? Do they have certain, like, do they have to dress super conservative in order not to look down upon, or?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't get away with some of the things that you see in the United States. You know,
And, like, are they treated different? Like if I was to go and show my hair, what would it be like?
well, because you're a foreigner, they probably wouldn't get upset about it unless you wanted to go into a mosque. Then they would ask you to put on a covering. So you know, they will cut you some slack because you're a foreigner, but yeah, you would probably be dressed immodestly from what an Omani would be dressed like. You know, there would be no tight jeans, no short skirts, no short shorts, no shorts at all, really. Really, even the men don't even wear shorts. I mean, that's pretty. If you want to stand out as an American tourist or a European tourist, yeah, I mean, wear shorts. I mean, I never wear shorts when I travel because I mean, granted, I'm going to still give myself away, but I don't really. You know, I want to respect the local traditions and the local culture as much as possible. And besides, my legs aren't that great looking anyway. So.
If you were to study there or something, would you be expected because you're there for more of the time to dress?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I would imagine you'd want to try to fit in with the other students in the college. I don't know what rules or laws that, if any, you would be breaking by doing otherwise. I'm sure they would cut you a little bit more slack because you're a foreigner, but I wouldn't let that put you off of traveling to these areas, or if you wanted to go to school there, because it's a great way. I mean, after all, when you travel, the best thing is kind of experiencing the culture of the places you're going to. So, I mean, you can, you know, shed some of your American ways when you go overseas, and try, when in Rome, do as the Romans, as they say. Yes?
Compared to other parts of the Middle East, how dangerous would you say Oman is? I mean, it looks
Oh, that's a great question. And no, Oman is not dangerous at all. I felt completely safe to walk around. Nobody told me where I had to go. Of course, I didn't have my own transportation, so inevitably I was either hiring a taxi or something. But security is very good in Oman. But it's not like you have to go through metal detectors everywhere either. Maybe it's because they feel that they've got their borders so secure. But I found that in Oman, the security measures inside the country were much less visible than, say, in Egypt or even in Turkey or India, where in India, you know, just to go to the local movie theater, I had to go through a metal detector. I had, you know, none of that in Oman. So, you know, the security airport was very tight. Probably the tightest was when I connected through Doha, Qatar. Had the tightest security I've ever had. I mean, they confiscated all kinds of stuff. I had to go through 2 security screenings just to get on the plane. So, I mean, it was the security airport tight, but once you're inside the country, the security was much less visible, and yet you felt very safe. I've been to Oman, I've been to Egypt, I've been to Jordan, and now I've been to Turkey, and I never really felt afraid no matter where I was walking. There's some caveats, though. You have to be, I wasn't being provocative in any way. I wasn't advertising where I'm from. I wasn't, I'm a man. That makes a difference. I don't know if I would have felt as comfortable in much of those places walking around on my own as a woman. I really couldn't tell you what that is like. I guess you'd have to ask a woman who's traveled there. But for the most part, I felt the people from this region of the world are very trusting, very honest. You know, I lost a camera in Egypt, went back, the guy was, an attendant had it there waiting for me. No thought of stealing it at all.
Could it be the sparse population that makes it possible to be less, sparse population? It's not as heavily populated as a country.
Yeah, in the case of Oman, Egypt has a large population. I don't know, a variety of things, but just cultural differences to be sure. You know, when I was in Egypt, never had to worry about anything other than a pickpocket. And terrorists in Egypt, they were most concerned about them hitting large groups. Walking alone, I think it's too small of a target, frankly. Although we have heard of examples of the off chance of it happening. But I think I'm going to Iran next week, and I'm more afraid of the Iranian domestic airlines than I am of any hostile activity. What's that? Oh, thank you. All right, thanks for being concerned. But I'm looking forward. I have a grant to go to Iran, and I'm looking forward. And hopefully you will come back and listen to my stories about Iran once I learn what I learned there. Thank you all for coming. Yeah. Great questions.